Most people think a Masonic temple is just a ceremonial room, a place with columns, symbols, and carefully arranged furniture. But that is only the surface. In the initiatic view, the temple is never just a building. It is a model of the universe, a map of the human being, and a stage where matter, mind, and spirit are brought back into order. And once you see that, the whole subject changes. Because the real question is no longer, what is inside a Masonic temple? The real question becomes, why? Was sacred space designed to mirror both the cosmos and the soul? To understand that, we have to go back before modern Masonry, before the lodge system, and even before the biblical world most people immediately associate with Masonic symbolism. In the ancient world, a temple was not built just to gather worshippers. It was built to establish order in the middle of chaos. In Egypt, the temple reflected cosmic principles, sacred kingship, and the drama of regeneration. In Mesopotamia, sacred. Structures marked a center where heaven and earth could meet. In Greece and Rome, proportion, direction, and ritual geometry mattered because a temple was seen as more than shelter. It was a measured image of a deeper harmony. The same pattern appears across many pagan traditions. Sacred groves, stone circles, fire altars, hill sanctuaries, and mystery cult enclosures all expressed one core idea. There are places where the visible world becomes transparent to the invisible. The forms were different. The gods were different. The rites were different. But the underlying intuition remained astonishingly consistent. Human beings kept recreating sacred space as if they knew, almost instinctively, that spiritual truth had to be embodied in orientation, rhythm, boundary, and symbol. That is one of the deepest expressions of the perennial philosophy. Truth descends into form, and form can train the soul to remember truth. Now, it is important to be precise here. Modern Freemasonry is not simply an unbroken secret survival of Egyptian priesthoods, Greek mystery schools, or pagan temples. Serious historians would not frame it that way. But symbolically and philosophically, Masonry clearly participates in that much older human language of sacred architecture. In other words, the lineage is not always institutional, but the pattern is undeniably initiatic. That pattern becomes especially powerful in the biblical image of the Temple of Solomon. For Masonry, Solomon's temple is not important only because of ancient Israelite religion or because of architecture in a historical sense. It becomes the great symbolic temple, the model of wisdom ordered into stone. Solomon represents wise governance, sacred measure, and intelligence aligned with divine law. The temple itself represents a world brought into order. And around that temple, Masonic tradition develops one of its most important symbolic dramas through figures such as Solomon, Hiram of Tyre, and above all, Hiram Abiff, the master builder who becomes central in the initiatic imagination. This is where the subject gets deeper. In ordinary history, a temple is a structure. In initiatic symbolism, it is also a task. You do not merely enter the temple, you become responsible for building it. That is why the language of Masonry is the language of construction. Stone, tools, measurement, craft, and labor all become spiritual metaphors. The rough ashlar is the unrefined self. The perfected stone is the self brought into alignment. The square, level, and plumb rule are not just instruments of builders. They become lessons in conduct, balance, rectitude, and truth. That transition makes more sense when we reach the medieval world. Operative Masonry was made up of actual builders, especially those associated with major stone construction. Over time, the symbolic value of the craft became just as important as the literal work. Then, gradually, especially between the 17th and 18th centuries, speculative Masonry emerged. The focus shifted from building cathedrals in the outer world to building character and inner order in the human being. That is one of the great transformations in Western esoteric history. The craft was preserved, but the temple moved inward. And yet the outer form never lost its importance. The modern Masonic Temple is arranged with deliberate symbolic meaning. It is usually oriented from west to east. That orientation matters because east is associated with light, sunrise, awakening, and the source of illumination. The candidate symbolically moves from darkness toward light, from confusion toward understanding. The lodge floor, often represented as a checkered or mosaic pavement, evokes the duality of life. Light and dark, joy and sorrow, active and passive, known and unknown. The pillars recall strength and establishment, threshold and polarity. The altar marks a center. The canopy of stars suggests that the temple is not just a room under a roof, but an image of the cosmos itself. To me, this is one of the most beautiful ideas in all initiatic symbolism. The temple is arranged so that a person does not merely hear teachings, but enters a teaching. Space itself becomes instruction. Direction becomes instruction. Silence becomes instruction. Repetition becomes instruction. And that changes the whole purpose of ritual. Ritual is not there simply to create atmosphere. It is there to reshape perception. This is why so many esoteric authors have treated the temple as more than an architectural subject. W.L. Wilmshurst, for example, emphasized the inward and spiritual meaning of Masonic symbolism. Albert Pike explored the vast philosophical and initiatic layers behind the ritual forms. René Guénon, from a more traditional metaphysical perspective, repeatedly treated sacred symbolism as a language of universal principles. Even when these authors differ in tone and interpretation, they converge on one major point. The temple is a symbol of reality structured according to higher law. And that brings us to the microcosm. In the old esoteric maxim, the human being is a little world, a small universe, a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. The same logic that structures the cosmos also appears in miniature in the human soul. This is where the Masonic Temple stops being merely historical and becomes existential. The temple is a map of the initiate. The East can be understood as the higher center of consciousness, the place within, where light first rises. The altar can be read as the heart, the point of covenant, intention, and inner offering. The two pillars can be understood as the polar forces that shape human life: severity and mercy, action and receptivity, strength and wisdom, discipline and openness. The mosaic pavement reflects the dual condition of embodied existence, where every person must learn to walk through contrast without losing their center. Even the vertical symbolism of the temple echoes the human condition. We are stretched between earth and heaven, instinct and spirit, time and eternity. When I first really understood that, the temple stopped looking like an old ritual chamber and started looking like a diagram of the human condition itself. And honestly, I think that is why this symbol has survived for so long, because it describes something people can actually feel. Most people know what it means to live inwardly divided. Most people know what it means to want more light, more order, more coherence. The temple gives symbolic form to that longing. This is also how experienced initiates tend to use the symbolism in practice. Not as trivia and not as aesthetic fascination alone. They use it as a method of self-observation and interior work. The rough stone becomes a daily question. What in me is still unshaped, reactive, vain, or asleep? The movement from west to east becomes a discipline of reorientation. Am I living from distraction or from awareness? The pillars become a reminder to balance extremes. The altar becomes a reminder that every real transformation requires sacrifice, not necessarily of possessions, but of illusions. In practical terms, that can mean learning silence instead of constant emotional leakage. It can mean moral discipline instead of self-flattery. It can mean seeing ordinary life as part of the work of construction. For some, the temple is most alive during ritual. For others, the real test begins after the ritual ends, when they have to, carry order into conversation, work, conflict, and solitude. That is the hidden demand of initiatic symbolism. If the temple is real, it must eventually appear in the way you live. And this is exactly why the idea kept evolving into modern times. In the 19th and 20th centuries, many writers, Masonic and non-Masonic alike, interpreted the temple through moral, metaphysical, psychological, and esoteric lenses. Some focused on comparative religion. Some linked it to Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Christian mysticism, sacred geometry, or perennial philosophy. Others reduced it to history, sociology, or ritual formalism. But the symbol itself remained alive because it can operate on multiple levels at once. It is historical without being trapped in history. It is symbolic without becoming empty abstraction. It is communal, but also deeply interior. And maybe that is the real secret. The Masonic Temple endures because it answers several human needs at once. It preserves memory. It creates order. It teaches through symbol. It dramatizes the path from darkness to light. And above all, it reminds the initiate that the true work is not only to admire sacred architecture, but to become inwardly habitable by truth. So when people ask what a Masonic temple really is, the most complete answer is this. It is a sacred image of the cosmos, a ritual inheritance shaped by many historical layers, a symbolic continuation of humanity's ancient need to sanctify space, and at the same time, a mirror of the human being. It stands at the meeting point of history and metaphysics, architecture and anthropology, ritual and inner transformation. It is stone, but it points beyond stone. It is outer form, but it exists to awaken an inner structure. And now I want to ask you something. Do you see the temple mainly as a historical sacred structure, or more as a symbol of the human soul? Let me know in the comments, because that answer says a lot about how each person approaches initiation. And here is another one. Which symbol speaks to you most deeply? The pillars, the altar, the mosaic pavement, or the journey from west to east? I would genuinely love to read your take. If you enjoy this kind of deep symbolic decoding, leave a like on the video, because that really helps this channel keep making serious, high-value content on esotericism, Masonry, and spiritual symbolism without watering it down. In the end, the temple may be made of walls, columns, and ritual space, but its real purpose is to remind you that your life, your mind, and your soul are also under construction. And maybe that is why the symbol stays with people long after the ceremony is over. Because the temple is never only the place you enter. It is the order you are trying to build within yourself. Subscribe if this kind of content speaks to you. Share this video with someone who loves esotericism or Masonic symbolism. And watch the playlist appearing on screen now, because each video opens another chamber of the same symbolic temple, and the deeper you go, the more the whole structure begins to reveal itself.